All right, morning everyone. I'm David Roque from Labat Healthcare, and I'll be discussing with you guys today the opportunities and challenges that lie within the cannabis economy. All right, medicinal cannabis opportunities. I think we've spoken a lot about this. Germany exported approximately 10 tons in 2021. Insurance companies, health insurance companies paid reimbursements for medicinal cannabis to the value of 123 million euros in 2019. With their adult use and legal cannabis close to being implemented, these volumes and figures are only expected to grow. United States, probably the biggest market and pioneers in the cannabis market, had amassed legal cannabis sales of $17.3 billion for 2021. Israel has just surpassed Germany as one of the biggest importers of medicinal cannabis and have a medicinal cannabis market valued at around $230 million. These are three of the biggest markets and players in the world, and as legislation around the world accommodates medicinal cannabis, there will only be an increase in new emerging cannabis markets and producers. There'll be exponential growth over the next 5 years. Medicinal cannabis challenges. There are in excess of 40 licensed producers for medicinal cannabis in South Africa, of which only two are exporting on a consistent basis due to compliance issues around medicinal cannabis. As Jeff would have mentioned, like you said, a lot of them require to export into Germany and stuff. You're going to need EU GMP certification. And like I said, there's no one in South Africa as yet who has got EU GMP compliance as a grow facility. I know Medi Kingdom in Lesotho, they've claimed that they've got it. But like I said, also in the cannabis market, you'll realize that a lot of people say they've got things that they don't have. Until it comes down to product getting sent out, you'll see the exports don't talk to what the documentation that they have. EU GMP is an expensive barrier to entry for most participants in the cannabis economy. Most of the current licensed producers have GMP compliance coupled with GACP and GAP as discussed. These barriers don't allow for the small-scale farmer to be a participant in the cannabis economy. However, we have developed projects that encompass technology, education, expertise to promote the inclusion of small-scale farmers into a formalized legit economy where all product can be sold via prearranged off-take agreements. No local market for licensed producers, which should be our first off-take. And there is no access to medicinal cannabis for the adult population within South Africa. I think we've touched on that basis a lot. It's a big issue. I think medicinal and recreational, to me, it's technically the same thing. It just allows separate to have their regulations in place in terms of the paperwork for the cannabis from licensed producer to COAs to the particular strains cultivated for particular ailments that are then prescribed by doctors to the patients. IP and genetic opportunities. Africa has a plethora of land-raised genetics. These are genetics which are indigenous to a specific region. These are the unique cannabinoid profiles, which are stable due to being cultivated within the African climate for years, and as they have already acclimated. Opportunity to develop active pharmaceutical ingredients and develop unique IP from indigenous cannabis cultivars, which have been cultivated for hundreds of years. Right? Breeding programs using land-raised genetics as the stable breeding lines to develop unique cultivars that are high in potency, yield, and are stable. Commercialize the new genetics for both medicinal and recreational use around the world. We currently have relationships with some of the biggest seed distributors globally who have a keen interest on rare and unique African land-raised genetics, i.e. Roy Bart, Swazi Gold, Malawi Gold, and Transkei, to name a few. So IP genetic challenges. For years, peoples have brought foreign genetics for germination in South Africa, which posed a direct threat to the land-raised genetics due to cross-pollination and dilution of the land-raised genetics and the preservation thereof. There is currently no framework for plant breeders' rights for cannabis and hemp genetics in South Africa. This puts a lot of IP at risk as breeders cannot register their genetics to protect their IP and prevent foreigners from taking IP and registering it with international bodies. I.e., if we look at Dutch Passion, they own the rights to Durban Poison, which is a South African variety. With no framework in place, we risk losing IP which belongs to the people of Africa. This also means that where land races are used to breed better varieties, they will not be able to get their royalties or 50% ownership of new variety that has been bred, which is a major issue, along with the fact that we don't have any nurseries providing the best trial and tested landrace genetics or varieties that have been bred with land races to licensed producers to produce stable crops. All right, the hemp opportunity. I think we all know the potential that hemp has to change South Africa. I mean, it's the biggest opportunity within the industry, viewed as the next green revolution, according to the global experts. There are many industrial applications for hemp, which is why it is believed to be revolutionary. Here are to name a few: biodiesel, bioethanol, hempcrete, hemp bricks, biodegradable plastics, paper, textiles, energy, fertilizers, food, and so much more. Creating a green industry whereby products can be created to give rise to carbon credits, rebates initiated for corporates who embrace these green solutions, which are going to impact the environment in a big way. I mean, think of buildings that have the capacity to break down CO2 while being able to run off renewable energy. That's the future of smart buildings. There is no waste model with hemp, whereby every part of the plant is used to produce some sort of byproduct which can be used. Hemp uses less water and fertilizers than other crops, so it ticks all the boxes when you're looking at sustainability. Hemp has a huge role to play within the agricultural sector for South Africa and can provide a lot of solutions to the already existing problems that we have. Hemp challenges. I think there's a lot more that I wanted to list here, but if we just go with the main ones that we have, I think it's knowledge about hemp is probably the biggest challenge. First of all, people are not clued up on these hemp genetics, and secondly is understanding that hemp is a threat to medicinal crops. Reason being cross-pollination. A lot of the hemp cultivars they monodiecious or docious, so it means that they can produce both reproductive organs, so they can actually self-produce pollen and seeds and all of that. So you don't want to have that close to your medicinal crops, because then obviously it's going to contaminate them. So hemp farming needs to be very strategic when you're looking at where these hemp farms need to be, and we need to consider the medicinal farmers as well, because there's a crossover there for contamination or potential risk. So understanding when it comes to hemp, it's only feasible on large scale, as most international partners don't cultivate anything less than 1,000 hectares, else it will not be financially feasible. All right. We've got constraints around our hemp genetics, THC levels around 0.2%. This is an issue for African climate due to high UVB content obtained on the African sun. All right. I know a lot of guys who have cultivated hemp genetics from Europe that say that they tested and it comes out at 0.2. Yes, that's all well and good and well when you're in Europe, but I promise you, when you bring them here to South Africa, we've got a term that the cultivators use: the genetics run hot. So it means that THC always touches more, 0.71%. And according to the hemp laws, that's then a condemned crop. So I think those type of constraints need to be considered, because we're trying to bring international or European standards for Africa. And we know Africa is different. It's a different climate. So we should therefore look at establishing a different, or just an African standard for cultivation around, and it'll probably be more of an organic standard, because that's the benefit that we have in South Africa in terms of being able to cultivate 100% organically and get certain cannabinoids. You know, if we look at what's going on in the USA, Humboldt is one of the biggest breeders there, and they produce strictly organic crop, and they've done the test on it to say that the cannabinoids that are getting produced in organic grows are a lot richer and a lot better than just specifically synthetic or controlled grows like your indoor. So I think South Africa is going to be a very big player in the organic space, and we must use that to formulate our own standards that can be used or adopted by Europeans or the American market, etc. The other big issue that we have is that there's no processing for hemp currently. I mean, this could obviously due to high capital requirements. I mean, a lot of the equipment, I'm sure guys would have seen, like the hemp train, there's various things for processing and stuff like that, but the equipment costs a lot of money. And like I said, no one's going to set up processing if we don't have a market. I feel like in the cannabis industry, we're doing everything backwards. Like you said, we jumped the gun, licenses get issued, everyone goes and gets a license, but what are they all sitting with? They're all sitting with the same issue. They're all sitting with product that they can't sell. So we issue these licenses, but we don't have a market. It's the same thing for hemp. It's the same thing that's happening. We're going to roll out all of these hemp permits. We're going to get guys planting. There's two issues that comes up there. First of all, I mean, you don't understand how much hemp seed you need to grow hemp. On 1,000 hectares, we're talking about tons of seeds. On 1 hectare, you can use up to 25 kilograms of seed. So you can see how if you start scaling that up, it's huge, huge volumes. Where do we have the access to this? Who's going to access it? I don't know anyone who has access to that type of quantity of seeds here. So it's again the horse before the cart type of a situation where we're issuing all these permits, but we haven't thought everything throughout. How are we going to get genetics to the people? And not just that, what are the offtakes that are in place? Who is going to offtake this biomass? Because we can create tons of biomass, but who's going to take it? It's the exact same thing, medicinal, lots of guys cultivating cannabis, but who's buying it? There's only a few guys who are able to get their product out there or have the compliance or the context to broker that flower. Auxiliary opportunities, indigenous knowledge systems. We have a big collective of IKS healers who have knowledge of cannabis and varieties and other plant varieties and herbs. This collective can consult on the development of new herbal and plant-based medicines. This is the future of healthcare, a place where a more organic method of healing will be the preferred choice. Blockchain technologies can be used to offer collation of data within the cannabis economy, from registered genetics and breeding plans down to the data being collected on the ground, such as farmers, yields, THC levels, customers that are importing the product, and so forth. Blockchain technology will allow for the capturing of invaluable data that will be guiding the future decisions of the cannabis industry as we look to create efficiencies on all variable inputs. Tax for cannabis. South African legal and illicit market was worth 21.92 billion rand in 2019. Think of how much taxes could be generated if there was access to medicinal cannabis for adults through controlled and regulated models. Challenges for auxiliary challenges. IKS healers don't have access to funds to obtain the licenses for cultivation of cannabis, but have a lot of knowledge which could be of value to many people within the industry. And thus some sort of value exchange should be looked into between licensed producers and IKS or indigenous knowledge system healers that are around the country. Internet infrastructure in the rural areas might prevent the complete implementation of blockchain technology in rural communities, which could lead to them being excluded from participation in the market due to technological constraints. Tax framework and development. We require extensive expertise and understanding of the cannabis market in order to encompass all relevant aspects and achieve a complete and efficient framework for taxation of cannabis within South Africa. And that's it from my side, just a nice overview on everything. If you guys have any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. So yeah, I think you highlighted a blind spot for me, this whole IP issue. Because yeah, when we were at Cannabis Expo, we also saw some of those guys selling urban poison, and yeah, it's like using the word champagne.
It's the champagne and the rooibos conversation over again. Okay. Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have any questions or comments?
I think the point you raised on hemp agro-processing is important. This has been well documented in the US with the 2018 Farm Bill. What happened when everyone rushed in, they cultivated an excessive amount of hemp. Specifically, then the legislation allowed them to extract full cannabinoids, whereas here it's not going to be the case. Hemp here is going to be excluded from extraction for cannabinoids because they will still require SAP license. So you even narrowed further than the US was. So anyone who's looking at the US as a model, they'll learn two things. One, a lot of people lost their shirts in the process because they over-cultivated. There wasn't agro-processing to meet demand. And then add to that the fact that you will not be, at the moment, as legislation stands, you will not be extracting for, let's just call it cannabinoids from that. So that's another shirt that you lose in the process, and maybe you lose your pants now. But the reality is that is a very big point, is we should not be irresponsibly just giving out permits for cultivation. Yes, I mean, you can allow for it, we shouldn't stop it, but we need to then, government needs to step in and start looking at agro-processing and supporting institutions like CSIR to do, and it's probably going to have to be at a big scale almost, I know there was a Winterton plant that was decommissioned at some point, but we need decorticators. We need, and textile is so, it's 5-6 years before we can even get to the point where, I mean, even the US market is struggling with textile grade hemp materials. And that's been mature now for 4 or 5 years. So let's make it 4 years. So no, it's a good point because you shouldn't just rush into hemp.
Yeah.
We're going to lose our hymn then. That's where the word comes from.
Yeah, my comment is also on the feasibility of growing on a large scale. The thing that I'm seeing now with the permits is the maximum allocation there is 50 hectares per application, which is quite small.
Yeah, I think that's the issue, is that if we ask the person who's drawing up the hemp permits how much hemp they've grown, they'll tell us. And that's exactly what we're saying, is that, you know, we've got international markets to learn from. Australia and America are already pioneering in the hemp, and they're growing on large scale. But like you said, they're able to process it. The other thing is, if we look at hemp in the rural areas, you know, we're going to have to look at some sort of portable decorticator that can get into these areas where the guys are cultivating mass hemp, you know, because your logistics also starts coming into play. You'll need processing centers around South Africa. You won't be able to have one big processing center because logistically it won't make sense. It won't be financially feasible. So we'll need a decorticator in Gauteng, Eastern Cape, Cape Town. You know, that needs to be looked at it. But I think, you know, that's why it was very important for the regulators to be here today, for us to be able to engage with them and say, you know, you're giving us this framework to operate within, but it actually doesn't make sense because, you know, like you said, we can go on Google and we can research the data, but when I go and I try and put it, I actually practically go and try and do it. It doesn't always just come out like that. And so we've got to learn from the guys on the ground. And I think that's what it is we've got people writing a policy, but they're not actually understanding cannabis or hemp. And that's the issue. There's a major disconnect between the people who are actually in cannabis and the people who are drawing up the reforms and policy for cannabis. So it's a big issue in this country at the moment.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to comment on the same line of legislation, what I saw in this. It's despite of not having the right skills and hubs in place, they do have the legislation which is very smooth for any international companies or South African companies to go in to grow, extract, and not even just cannabis. They've already started talking mushrooms on that end, and it's been pretty open on that. And not only just extracts or CBD and THC, they are also working on further byproducts as to how the biomass can be further used for industrial hemp, for hempcrete, for compost. So just focusing on the whole value chain, and I think that's an important piece that South Africa should be looking at. The second point being around blockchain technologies, I feel that's the need of the hour, and if we start from the get-go, we'd have enough data so that the industry grows in a sustainable way. Thank you.
And in the Lesotho legislation is also silent on this magic number.
Yeah, I believe so. Look, it's very liberal in Lesotho, and that's why guys are flocking there, because like you said, we know guys have they've set up cultivation, they've set up extraction because they can. And not just that, now they're coupling up to apply for their psilocybin licenses and the magic mushrooms. So, you know, I think Lesotho is definitely a competitor for SA, and we need to be careful because they're so liberal there and they're allowing for the flow of activities within the cannabis economy. You know, it can definitely pose a threat to us. So that's why South Africa, as South Africans, we need to wake up and cotton on to what's going on, because we need to be the pioneers. We fall under the PIC standard. We've got, you know, first-class infrastructure here. We need to be the pioneers for Africa and then migrate the skills into Africa. Like you said, we discussed, Yogesh, guys in Lesotho are doing it. Guys in Zim are already getting there and doing it. You know, Malawi is coming on board now. If we're not careful, we'll fall behind. And, you know, so that's why it's the cannabis, it's moving at such a rapid pace. And I can see we've been involved in it also since 2018. The way things have started in 2022 have been completely different. It's been 120 miles per hour from January. So, you know, things are definitely ticking over and going on. But like you said, regulatory constraints, you know, no clarity on the hemp. How are we going to do this? You know, we get all of the right things from the cannabis manifesto, but which government guy can I go and talk to and say, can you please tell me the plan for implementation on medicinal cannabis, how are we going to make it accessible for hemp? What is the rollout plan for hemp? Where do we see it going? Who are the off takers? Those sort of questions. That's what needs to be tabled. And if there isn't anything, then we need to look at collaborations with private enterprise who can come in and collaborate and possibly provide those off takes or provide the expertise, so that we can have a market, a whole circulation around from the hemp, from the grower to the end person who's actually going to take that biomass or whatever produced products that the farmers will be producing.
Thanks, David. I like your very practical approach. I think it's just able to cut through the water, so to speak. And I wonder as well, Prof, I think you can also chime in as well. So that the earliest record that I have been able to see of the use of hemp was in Egypt, it should be, right? Now, from your research and your learnings and your travels, in terms of the THC levels and also creating the old African or sort of Africanized way of growing the plant, what have been the learnings there? Have the then Egyptians still maintained some record or then practice of hemp, through the then generations, and what can we learn from there? Because I think it also impacts our then African free trade agreements and how we trade as Africans as well. So, those.
So that cotton came to the fore. In fact, it's very intensive. That's why they had to enslave some of us, because they had to go and work in the cotton fields. Yeah. And actually, before that, we had hemp. So you made pretty much all fabrics and fiber. That's why the Dutch Afrikaans word that says hemp, right? Yeah. And even on the sales, I think the word canapé comes from cannabis. So there's a lot of language that comes out of this cannabis hemp culture. Yeah. But I mean, we are here now, and there are all these barriers being put up. As one can understand some of them, but I think this is just a fear of this thing. Because like Jeff was saying, in fact, alcohol is probably more dangerous. Anybody can access it, right? Freely. And then you have cannabis, which you can't really use in the lab, for instance. You don't get a special license for handling 99% pure alcohol, but how many people are actually abusing it? Not many people. Yeah. So I think, like you're rightly pointing out, we need to sit with regulators in the room and actually educate them, but the regulators should be teachable. I think one of the problems is that regulators sometimes are not teachable. Yeah. And that's what I kind of picked up in the suit, that the industry actually hates the regulators. Yeah, to a point to say this is what we want. So it then becomes a win-win situation, right? But I've been in rooms with regulators, and I mean, I don't know if, the cannabis, nobody can say they're an expert. I taught myself the cannabis industry in the past 3 years. I know a bit more because, I'm an academic, because I spend all my time reading these things. But you'll find that you can sit with the regulator and you advise them maybe on certain things, and you're like, no, the law says this. But the law doesn't say that, because cannabis didn't exist 5 years ago. Yeah. The Prime Minister in Lesotho said in 2008, that's when they started working on their legislative framework.
Yeah.
And I think they've amended it 3-4 times. Yeah.
I also believe Eastern Cape has worked on hemp extensively in the past, and a lot of the guys that we've communicated with the Eastern Cape don't know where this data is. I mean, they had also cultivated projects. There has been money and investment into hemp before, but no one knows where the information is, so it's again that thing. So we rebuilding that now, going back to say how are we going to get this data? How is the best way to start the hemp industry? How is the best way to take it forward? But like I said, we're looking to our overseas partners for guidance, for guys who have been there and done that, who've made the mistake, and now for us to come back, because we've already made mistakes on the medicinal side. Let's not take those mistakes across to the hemp, because then we're really going to see big issues. It's big industry that can be created there, a lot of value. I think as for radical economic transformation within South Africa, hemp is one of the biggest things that is going to do it. We're talking about unemployment rates. Hemp can create jobs. You're looking at 4 jobs per hectare. I mean, if you're doing 1,000 hectares, that's when you start talking, you see the economies of scales in terms of the jobs. So, I mean, there's huge potential there, but it needs to be given time and effort and the right people coming together to formulate the infrastructures for people to operate so that we'll be successful, not just giving guys permits and saying, go farm hemp, because we know what's going to happen. They're going to farm and they're going to sit in the same position where they're sitting with biomass or product that no one's going to buy or no one's going to take, because there's no current market for hemp byproducts or raw hemp, processed raw hemp products.
Okay. Yeah. So we've got a question online. Lekale, you can unmute and ask your question. Then if anybody else wants to ask, they can just put up their hand.
Can you please add some more information
The
on...
speaker, please.
Oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
better? Yes, I was saying, can you please add some more information on the use of hemp around...
Just hold on. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, try.
Okay, I was saying, can you please add some more information on how hemp can be used for fuel production and for fertilizer? You dealt with it, but can you give us even more information, especially in terms of how many hectares do you need and what type of fuels can you create? And the fertilizer, where can that fertilizer be used in terms of existing markets for that fuel and that fertilizer, please?
Okay. Well, there's a lot going on with hemp. I think, you can create your biodiesel and bioethanol through fermentation processes. But, so there's so many products in so many ways. But like I said, I couldn't tell you the exact amount that you need. Guys are running projects where they're doing 1,000 hectares, but they're producing fiber and bioethanol and possibly seed cultivars if they're cultivating or anything like that. So, we do have something in detail that I could probably share with the prof in terms of a hemp PowerPoint, which basically shows you all the possibilities, all the products you can make and how they are made. So I don't know if that helps with any of the questions that you have.
Yeah, it would be absolutely perfect.
Okay, yeah. So just drop an email to Nano and then we will share the slides.
Okay, no, that's perfect. I'll do that.
Okay. But thanks a lot. We've now finished with the formal presentation. So we have very quick presentations by industry partners. Veronica,